talk about, if two regions wanted to come together, what's the process and what's going on with that. Also, Glenn is here, and I'd like to introduce, this is Paul Galaducci, who's also one of our consultants, former superintendent, Jay Barry, one of the consultants, and our assistant executive director, Christine Johnson, came tonight. She wanted to observe and see what happens. So, and then Glenn is here as well. I think I'd like to go around the room to know who's here,
Yes.
say your position in the town or whatever, so we have some idea. So we've introduced ourselves. We'll start with Peter.
So I'm Peter Dillon, I'm the Berkshire Hills.
I'm Lucy Krashker, and I'm a representative from the town of Alford on the 8-town committee.
Jeff Perdola, Stockbridge Selectman.
Tom Burkle, Economic Finance.
John Silbert, Monterey Finance.
Tara White, Selectman, New Marlboro.
Nadine Hauer, Selectman Sheffield.
Ed Abrams, Select Board, Great Barrington.
Steve Bannon, Chairman of the Berkshire Hills Regional School District School Committee.
Jane Burke, Chairman of the Southern Berkshire Regional School Committee.
Molly Thomas with Sacra School Committee. Eileen who lead the newsletter.
Charlie Ketchen, Alford Select Board.
Ann Hutchinson, the Berkshire Hills Regional School District Committee.
Jonathan Bruno, Southern Berkshire Regional School District.
Right here, sir.
Terry Cowgill of the Berkshire Edge.
Are you going to be recording?
Yes.
Everybody realizes that this meeting is being recorded.
Again, Christine Johnson, Assistant Executive Director.
Glenn Cooch from Massachusetts Association of School Committees.
Bonnie Silvers, Southern Berkshire Regional School District School Committee.
George McGurn, Vermont Select Board.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Talking with Peter, talk about if you wanted to do two regional schools that exist, what is the process that you go through? And I have a PowerPoint tonight, and I forward that to Peter, and we can send it out to people if you'd like to have it.
Great, thank you.
A lot of times, if you put it in front of you, then people don't pay attention. So, this is the options. One of the options that you could do, if you have two regional school districts with regional agreements, you could take, I'm doing A and B, not neighbor names, and you could have District A could form a regional amendment committee, and then you could then put on the amendment you want and invite members from the other region to come in, and you could amend that regional agreement. Option two, the regional B could do that, and it could be reverse, asking the A to come in and be part of that. Option three is the towns could form what they call as district planning committees, and then a district planning boards, two more towns in your case, you could get eight towns.
Correct.
Planning, we don't go over that, and we go into that one. One of the things I would say is if you wind up with option three, or option one or two, if you say option three, and you're gonna form a new, totally new region of 8 towns, and we'll talk about later, but in each case, town A and town B, those agreements have to be amended, and then they have to be approved by the commissioner that you are ending that with those particular regions, and you're getting into a new one. So there's a process that you gotta go through with that. Any amendments to a regional agreement by law, by regulations have to be approved by the department and signed by the Department of Education, signed by the commission.
Can I just make a point of order? I was under the impression that we were interviewing facilitators.
They're making a presentation to show us the process tonight.
Okay, so we've changed the
No,
agenda?
no, that was always the process.
Yeah, I think explicitly we were never interviewing people, we were getting some context so that we might be in a position to create an RFP to then eventually solicit people and then at that point.
I'm not sure that's what the minutes.
These would be the gentlemen that would help facilitate the process for us, John.
Right, and I thought what we were doing was bringing in 2 facilitators so that we could interview them and decide how we were going to move forward with the facilitator.
The interview process is them presenting to us what the process is.
So do we have to do that?
I repeatedly said that this was not an interview. I don't think this is an interview.
Okay, so when do we have an
after some sort of RFP is developed and we solicit proposals to go forward.
Okay, so this is an information.
We can't really hire anyone until we have the money to hire someone.
Well, and we can't hire anyone till we have context
To know what we're asking for.
right, if we interview people tonight, it would be.
I didn't say interview, but
Right.
we agreed that they were going to present as facilitators, as potential facilitators.
what they would bring forward to the table to, as a facilitator.
Well,
That was my.
I think if we let them continue, we'll get to where you're comfortable with the information that's coming forward.
Right, I mean, we also talked about facilitators versus consultants.
Correct.
So this sounds like a consultant.
I think what we're doing right now, John, is learning the process from people who can help us facilitate proper questions to put an RFP together.
Could I just read something out of the minutes which we haven't approved? Facilitators will be asked to come to the next meeting and explain to the committee and the committee and the two school committees how to guide us and organize us through the formal process. That's what he's doing.
Okay.
That's what the minutes show.
Thank you, Steve, appreciate that.
Well, why don't I pick up what we're trying to show you. You are members, both regions are members of the association, Mars, that's the Association of Regional Schools. We do the process, we're showing you the process. We also facilitate that process, but you would have to go out with a request for proposal, request for services, and then we would respond to that. So that you have to put that together and you have to have the money in order to hire. But again, we do facilitate as well as the process, how you then, whichever way you choose, from your region or many regions, whatever, we provide those services.
Thank you.
So one of the things that you need to know is that you want to
Questions as you go, or would you rather
I'd like to see if I can get through, and I'll gladly go back, otherwise I find you get bogged down in one of them. There's 10 slides to go through. Very basically, is we form a planning committee, and a planning committee consists of 3 people. One has to be a member of the school committee from that town, and then 2 other appointees. And what happens is any town, by a majority vote of their school committee and their board of selectmen, can request the moderator to appoint a 3-member planning committee in each town, minimum of the 3 members that they have. And they also talk about what they can raise for some money, and then again, the regional planning committees from any 2 or more towns may join together what they call as a planning board. That is, they sitting down together, 8 towns sitting down together. The duties of the planning board is to take a look at shall they do with the planning committee, district planning board to study the fiscal and educational advisability of establishing a regional school district. To review its organization, you can see the rest of it. To estimate construction operating costs. To assess educational soundness, to investigate methods of financing, and analyze any or all other matters pertaining to the organization and operation of the regional school district. And to submit a report of its findings and recommendations to the selectmen of the several towns. So you come through with the planning board coming up with what is advantageous for us to go forward with it, and also what all those issues that you have to answer to be find acceptable you want to go forward with. You gotta have the data and the facts. One of the big things I'll tell you that you need to look at as we talk about the financial piece is gets into your collective bargaining agreements and how you have to, with your new region, you have to negotiate new collective bargaining agreements. Regional structure formation. The said regional district planning board may recommend that there be established a regional school district, which may include all the towns represented by its membership, or alternatively in specific combination. If said regional district planning board so recommends, it shall submit a proposed agreement or agreements setting forth to each alternative recommendation for such as the following. And it has to go into, that they would go into, which has to be in a regional agreement, which you have, is the composition in terms of the school committee, the towns, the type of region that you're going to have, the type of regional school district is going to be, is it going to be a 9-12 or K-12, whatever it's going to be that you have to set up. If you have vocational as part of your organization that you want, you would need regional vocation, but you can then have a 74 program to your district if you so choose. The method, this is the big part, the method of apportioning expenses, it's the assessment and how you would do that. And the one thing I want to go back for, one more is, this is the A is the composition of the members of the school committee. And you have to meet what they call 1 person, 1 vote requirement, and there's 5 ways to meet that. I say to people, you take a look, every 10 years, there is reapportionment of congressional districts. Everybody recalls that? Well, the same thing you have based on population. It's like every 500,000 you get one congressman. Well, you have to calculate with 5 ways that you'd have to have your school committee members, so 1 person, 1 vote, that you can do that. The assessment process you have to come up with and you're required to have, and you built into it is a statutory method, and then you can have an alternate method if you want to, but they have to be clearly defined in the agreement. The method by which transportation will be provided, if any such transportation is furnished by the district, in the manner in which expenses shall be borne by the towns. In a number of cases, it's based on, you take your total cost of transportation minus your chapter 71 reimbursement, and then the difference is assessed out to the towns, and usually it's by per pupil basis, how many pupils you have who pay for that term. And then if the terms of which any CRT may be admitted or separated, you have to define it. There's nothing in the law that says you have to have it in the agreement. In regional agreements, which Berkshire Hills just went through with us a couple of years ago, is that you have to define things in there so it's very clearly understand how you're going to proceed. The method by which your agreement may be amended, how are you going to amend it? All towns have to vote it, or just 2/3 vote. There's no law that says all towns, but originally when regional agreements were first done in the 50s, it was written on all towns. There's no law that says all towns have to approve it, you have 2/3, but most have all towns want to be, you have to approve it. Preparation, adoption of an annual budget, and any other matters not compatible with law, said board may be advisable. And then copies of the agreement shall be submitted to the Department of Education, and has to be approved by the department, also for the town's acceptance, and also reviewed by municipal school council, so they review it as well. Before it would go out to the towns to be voted, you want to get your school committee would have, your regional planning board would approve it, and then it would go to the, it would be sent to the councils, make sure they go to the Department of Education, if they approve it, and says if the town's passed, then the commission would sign off, and you have an approved agreement. All agreements have, and the commission will only sign off when every part of the agreement has been stated, they have a checklist, everything you have in there, and it's defined so clearly understood. Decision, region, would decide if they are interested in forming a region school district. If yes, choose the method to explore creating a region. Creating a regional school district planning board could use recently adopted regional agreement as a model. And note that in the FY budget, there is regionalization money. Grant just came out. The department has appropriate $500,000, and you can apply to them. You would qualify for one of those grants. I think, Peter, I sent that to you, the grant to you. And that, because you're having two regions forming one, you could qualify for get aid for that. It's due very quickly. Now, one of the things you have to do is, if you were going to form, you have two active regions, you're going to form one. You have to review each regional agreement for the process of closing that district. It has to be defined how do you have to close it. How are existing principal interest obligations satisfied? You just can't end a region and not, if you had debt on a building, you just can't say, oh, look what I'm not going to do it anymore. No, that has to be a process. How liabilities are distributed among the towns, and how are assets distributed? Because obviously the district, a lot of times own the high schools and middle schools, who's going to have those assets when you form a new one? Who's going to own those? Those have to be defined. In negotiated terms for disestablishing, may be described an amendment to the existing agreement. You have to amend each of the current agreements on this process of closing down, and then where all these assets, where everything's going to go. You would take approximately 2 to 3 years to do the process, because you've got to, if you're going to go to the planning board, you're going to go to amend an agreement, you got to go through every town has the input to it, selectmen, FinCom's inputting to come up with an agreement that's acceptable and then approved, and then you have to go through the process of the department saying, okay, we'll sign off if all the towns approve it. Once the planning board has said, here's the agreement, and the department said, okay, we've met every requirement, legal regulation requirement in there, and then the towns voted. Once it goes to the towns, they can't change it. I mean, here's what it's up or down vote. There's no amendments to that. You can't have one town saying, oh, I want to change this and the other. No, it's up or down vote with that particular, when you do that. The other thing that would be, that is really, was part of what we talked about earlier, that you want to plan and see what the financial implications are, is that collective bargaining agreements have to be negotiated. One of the things the law says, when you form a regional school district, teachers cannot be paid any lower than what they're making when you form a new region. Doesn't mean you go to the highest level, but they cannot get any lower. And there are negotiations that happen when you do that, when towns come together on your regions, you have to take a look at. I believe, how many collective bargaining agreements do you have? Teachers, I assume?
Teachers, paras, than the sort of catch-all group,
Okay,
so 3.
so all of those would have to be negotiated, and usually they carry on until their term is up, and then they have to be negotiated. You also have to have, in this process, is a transition period, and usually the department recommends at least 6 months to a year. That is because once you bring in everything from 2 departments, you gotta bring them all together, and you're establishing a new central office, and superintendent, business managers, sped director, so forth, your accounts payable, and payroll, who's, with the payroll, all the files, where they're gonna go, what's gonna happen. You're not gonna have 2 central offices, you have 1. So again, that takes some transition time to do that as well. So this is what was asked to give you as short as possible, a process that you could use. Remember, I'll summarize. One is you could take a current agreement and amend that one, bring the towns in. We usually don't recommend that because one town said, well, we join the other, no, they can, you want to come as equals. And you then would follow what the law is, to have a planning committees and planning boards, and they sit down and go from there. Again, you have to remember, go back to make sure you follow what the current regional agreements say about when you're going to be amended, and then when you're gonna, if you're gonna close down, and the biggest thing is distribution of assets and liabilities. I would try to keep it as short as we can. And that's one question that you have, and I don't know if you wanna ask us, and then Glenn can talk with it as well.
A couple of quick questions. In the beginning, you give options A, B, and C, and option A and B involve sticking with one district and having the other one join it. The one that joins it has to go through the dissolution process for theirs also, right?
Both, yes.
Both would.
No, you're correct.
Just the one.
You're correct. One would have to go to the dissolution, the other not, but again, you have to define how are those assets and to be distributed
Right.
into those.
And then the decision process when it goes to the towns, is that a town meeting vote?
Yes,
Simple majority?
simple majority of town meeting.
Okay, and every single town has to.
Actually, I'm gonna take it back for a minute. There is, you gotta go back, if you're amending an agreement, it is then, simple majority of town meeting. If you want a new one, there's a clause in there, and I have to go back, it's a ballot vote at town meeting, and it's put again by majority vote, but there's a ballot vote required in the regional agreement.
A ballot
A ballot
Okay.
at town meeting, you can vote yes or no, and you probably will.
at town meeting.
At town meeting.
Okay.
I have to think, again, to go back to some of that, but that's, again, you have to, part of our job is we research, depending on what you choose, and then say, here's the process that we would recommend.
And if keeping the possibility open to invite other towns than that are represented by the 2 districts, would all 3 of those options still be possible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they all 3 will do whatever you want to do. It also becomes, when you're amending going to one agreement, it becomes sort of a perception of, well, we got into another one as opposed to our own, we want to get a brand new one. And what are you gonna call that? Okay, the name of this, you're gonna go by the current name, or you're gonna change differently with other towns coming in. So, all of that. But again, it has to be at town meeting, I believe in this case, if you're going there, it would be a ballot vote at town meeting. It's just town meeting.
Can you just go back to that first slide for us while we're talking about it? Thanks.
Yeah, I did, if I may. I understood you to say that all outstanding debt becomes consolidated?
No, I said it has to be decided how you're going to handle the debt.
Okay, so it's not necessarily consolidated.
Correct.
What about an encumbered asset? That would also have to be negotiated?
You said you may example.
For example, in business FASB 52, you have an encumbered asset, it's useless because it's in the wrong place, it has the wrong machinery, whatever. If you have an asset like that, that has to be determined, its disposition.
All assets would have to be determined. One of the big things in the regional district is you're dealing with the OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits, and each of you have a OPEB liability. You have to decide how that liability is going to be divided up. You could have, if there's a debt on a particular region, maybe that debt would be only accept to those towns that voted the debt, not necessarily putting it together in other towns who have to pay some of that debt. That's all negotiable at the time that you do it.
And if you have 2 regions, one was the simple majority and one was a super majority, how does that?
So what do you mean when you say supermajority?
Or for example, Southern Berkshire, you have to have a super majority, you have to have 4 of the 5 towns.
For what?
to make any real changes.
Pass the budget.
Yeah.
We don't have 3
3
of 5.
of 5 won't do it.
Well, exactly.
That has to be figured out
Yeah.
by your,
Again, you have to look at that, that's why sometimes it's better to create a new region, because then you agree on what majorities you're going to have. Again, is that all towns would have to approve the agreement, and they have to approve amendments. But interestingly, you're not working with the department, there's no law that says you have to have unanimous. You could have, we know a district that could decide that they want 2/3 majority, there's like 8 towns, and if 2/3 of them voted yes, then the amendment went through, not all of them had to vote yes. But again, it started back, originally I looked at some years ago, and you go back, what happened is the first regional agreement that came out, everybody else seemed to copy that. And one of the things they put first is interesting is the school committee on the beginning of the regional agreement instead of the type of region, okay, and then so forth in the school committee. We dealt with the Department of Education, and they kind of encouraged us to work with people to put them in a logical sequence. Sometimes they put assessment first before you do budget. You do the budget, and then you gotta do the assessment. So again, making sense of the order. Also writing the agreement so that what you know, what you wanted to say today, in 10 years, 20 years, everybody knows what exactly they're supposed to do. Yes, sir.
just to be clear, your option 1, option 2, those would essentially be less complex administratively?
Could be, but you still gotta figure out all of the district, you gotta figure their liabilities and assets, what's gonna happen with them, how you're gonna combine them, not combine them, what are you gonna do?
But in your judgment, would those processes be less drawn out or protracted than option 3?
No, not
They're not?
necessarily. No. It's not, and again, one of the things is, when you form what we call District Agreement Amendment Committee, we call it the RAC, R-A-C, is that you can, it's kind of interesting, how it works. The school committee then can decide who they want to appoint on that committee. Nothing in the law says that you have to. Now, if you also want to go on to the Department of Education website under regional schools, several years ago, we wrote a process by which 2 towns coming together to form a region and all the things that you want to ask. So we wrote a contract with the department, didn't know it existed, we wrote it, and then it can be used by anybody. It's up on their website, gives you ideas like when you want to check, take a look at community, what do you want to find out about your community? Also, we talk about a community relations plan, how to get information out. Who do you want? You want people on the committee that are sometimes they're negative about it, as opposed to everybody's positive, and you want to hit the other side, and you want to bring people in so they clearly understand, and then going out and doing a public meeting so they understand what's going on.
One last question. I'm reading about this Senate Bill 2350. I hardly understand anything about it, but I understand it's going to the House. Anything in that change any of this?
Not the 2350, that's finance.
Student Opportunity Act?
I don't believe so. That's mostly dealing with a lot of the financing of schools. I haven't looked at that, at least that's what I'm hearing. I haven't looked at that closely, but I don't think it's going to affect anything on region. That's chapter 71. I don't think it's affecting chapter. I think it's more like chapter 7. Chapter 7.
Well, it does mention safety.
Yes, sir.
This is the first time that 2 regional school districts in the state has started to talk about combining, am I correct?
Well, there's one now, and there's another one starting in the east, so.
Okay.
This is 2 of them right now having a discussion.
And you're saying it'd take 2 to 3 years? There's no fast track for this to see where we're gonna be?
That's the fast track.
You can move as fast as you want, but there's things that you take time to put the data together. Again, you have to analyze, contracts, like collective bargaining agreements and all that, takes a little time to put that together, all those different things, as well as information out. And you gotta allow, I'm saying at least 6 months for a, transition period. And because you gotta negotiate, I'm just saying, if all of a sudden, people start push, people get suspicious, why are they pushing so hard as opposed to, here's what we're looking at, and here's why, plenty of explanation. I was involved, as the consultant, I was the, interim superintendent when, Somerset Berkeley formed. And one of the things that we did before that regional agreement, we went out like 8 times to meet with public groups so they clearly understood. It took us 1.5 years to work, 2 years to work on that.
thank you for the overview. It was helpful to get that context. Just want to follow up on the question that Chuck Ketchen asked. So, as I understand it, you've never worked before on the merger of two regional school districts. Is that correct?
Nobody has.
Nobody has. And there's one other combination that's thinking about doing this now and is actively working on it?
They are, we've done some work with this other region, and there's two of them looking at it, and they're gonna apply to that grant to take a look at that.
Okay.
That would be a 6-town region.
Okay, so let's talk about the kinds of mergers that you have worked on before. So have you worked before on a merger where there's a regional school district and then a single town
I'll let Dr. Barry,
coming into that regional
I'll let
school
Dr. Barry
district?
talk about that.
Excuse me?
Dr. Barry can talk about
Okay.
that. What, would you like him to give some, go ahead.
That'd be great, and it'd be really helpful if you could talk about, you know, both the successes and the failures in those discussions. So I'd be really interested to hear both when those talks have been successful and why, and when those talks have not been successful and why, as we're thinking about the best process here for moving forward, because we're in a very preliminary stage. So we're sort of exploring whether this is going to work, whether it makes sense. And I think it's important to get this initial process right in order to have a successful outcome, whether that successful outcome is consolidation or a decision that it doesn't make sense.
Let me, before we begin, let me just mention, Dr. Barry was superintendent at Southwick Tolland, and Paul and I came in as consultants from Mars, working with him to form Southwick Tolland Granville Regional School District.
Good, so
Dr. Barry,
we've got a case study right here. Good.
And I worked with two towns forming Somerset, Berkeley, when they formed their new region.
Yeah.
So it started with the Lower Pioneer Valley Planning Committee had a grant, and they hired me to come in to take a look at the feasibility of Granville joining Suffolk Town. I brought Steve in because Steve had a solid knowledge of the fiscal aspect, and then the two of us made a preliminary report, and then from that turned it over to the Regional School Committee. They sent out the RFP. We replied to the RFP. I'm not sure, I don't know if anyone else did, but then we were hired to bring in, we brought Granville in.
So yeah, I can offer a few comments about this, and I'm gonna amend a little bit what Paul said, because the origins of it started at the local level. Okay, it started with the select board at Granville coming to some realizations about how difficult it was to finance their independent K-8 school district. It was just getting tougher and tougher to do that. And then much of what Paul has had to say started to happen in terms of us looking for resources to help plan how this would happen. So it took over, in terms of Steve's slide, we used a regional agreement committee, amendment committee, to go about this. And there was town meeting endorsement, there were representatives on both sides. We had some consultant help to walk through the negotiations on building a new regional agreement. I'm sorry, just for clarification, that was option 3 in this case?
I believe we used we did not have a planning board, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve.
Right, no,
I thought we had an agreement amendment committee.
One regional committee and then.
So the Southwick Tolland agreement was amended to include
so
Granville. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was, it's a long process. Some of it is not analogous to what you're exploring, because it was, in addition to the fact that Granville was stretched to finance their independent district, it was also to some degree incentivized by a building project. Okay, so that was
Building project where?
with MSBA in Southwick,
So they were building something.
which was going to bring the district into one campus. Okay, so it was financially advantageous to Granville. It was, in terms of a capital project, advantageous to Southwick and Tolland. Unfortunately, after I left, the enrollment patterns and the finances, I want to be honest about this, changed a little bit so that the Granville School did have to close, okay? So that was a painful part of it. School closures are very
Was
painful.
that an amendment after the original agreement?
No, the closure was after the new district was formed.
So they formed a new district thinking they were gonna keep the Granville School.
Correct.
And then it got closed.
And then it got
But,
closed.
but we
So-
did write an amendment within the amendment
About how to do it.
about how to do it. So it couldn't be done.
I see, so you
like
needed
that.
an amendment to close it.
Yeah, so you needed to go through a process, and they did go through the process to close the school.
And
Okay,
it
so there was
wasn't-
no way to do it in the original agreement.
Right, so we had, as Steve said, by the time he and I, in that particular case, working with Jay, heard all of the issues, we realized that there needed to be a clause in the amendment that said how we're gonna close the school.
So before you continue, we have one more question on that.
Thank you, Nadine. I'm sure that Peter has briefed you a lot on our two districts. If we were to bring your services in, since we are a unique situation, how would you go about working with us? What services would you be bringing to us?
Okay, let me, if I can add a little bit more to your
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
before we get to that.
Sorry, Bonnie, I thought it was tied to this conversation,
So,
so we'll hold that question.
Yeah, so at any rate, those were there was an incentive for each party to come together on this. And the new district has survived the painful episode of the school closure. Although to Paul's point, the language on how to close a school was one of the most difficult things to negotiate in the regional agreement. We all knew that we had declining enrollment. We all knew that there was some need to bring things together. And we had to be honest about what the future might hold. So that was a tough thing to get through.
And did Granville get some relief from their financial constraints?
They did. In fact, their financial situation improved so much that when their share of the capital project came due, their debt service, they didn't even need a debt exclusion vote to pay for it. So it got much more cost efficient for them to be part.
After we did the
Yeah.
financial, it was almost a no-brainer, because they were just dying in debt trying to keep the little school open.
They were paying a very high percentage of their total tax revenue to support the school, and that changed a lot when they became a member of a district that had, 1,800 kids.
And that's why the roads now are better?
I don't know. I can't comment on that. But I want to add one other example to Lucy's question. So last year, our consultant group worked with two communities who formed under number 3, a regional school district planning board. And it involved the town of Amherst and the small town of Pelham. And they decided, and this, also I would add this, as you explore this, you don't need to make a decision about forming a new region. You need to make a decision, to be more specific, about whether you want to study forming a new region, okay? So they decided they wanted to study forming an elementary regional district, okay? The small town of Pelham, the much larger town of Amherst.
Can you just give them some context about what's going on in that area, 9 to 12 already?
Yeah, it's a little complicated, but yes, I can. So Amherst has a municipal or a school district for pre-K 6, okay? And then they are members of a 7-12 region, which includes Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury. So the regional district was not directly involved with the regional planning board study, but they did become indirectly involved. I'll get to that in a moment. So the two town meetings voted to form planning boards, and they decided to come together, elected a chair, and they started their work. So even with a small project like that, it lasted almost a year and a half, okay? And they have a 90-page final report that's on the website. I'm going to leave you with the literature if you want to read it. And they ultimately voted not to pursue regionalization for a number of reasons. So I just offer that as an example of a really thorough study of consolidation that did not go forward. And then the last point, and I'll stop talking, is after you work through this regulatory and statutory choice about a pathway to study what you might want to do, give some thought to how you want to study this issue, because it is a big topic, it's huge. And in the case of Amherst Pelham, one of the lessons that I think they all learned was that there might be, you might decide that certain issues have a priority over others. And the two that I think that come first are finances and education. You want it to work for kids, and you want it to work from a financial standpoint. And in retrospect, I think, if they had it to do over again, would have looked at the financial data right off the bat. It's either, does it work or doesn't it? And they got into a lot of study relative to governance and educational matters and school choice and all kinds of other things. And then the financial data came in, and it wasn't what people were hoping for. So get the numbers out there early if you decide to do this.
Yeah, I think that we all are sort of already knowing that if the numbers don't work, then the rest of it's kind of mute.
Before we go to Bonnie's question, which is actually the question I thought we were asking tonight, so I want to get there. I just want to finish up on this because I want to be very clear about option 3. So option 1 and option 2 seem like they originate with one or the other school committees.
Correct.
Option 3 appears to originate from the towns. And the towns form the regional district planning committee. My question is, again, we are, by the way, you are speaking tonight to a town committee, not to the school district committee. And one of the reasons why we formed was the financial piece. But I'm curious now specifically, if towns form a regional district planning committee, not the school committees, the towns are appointing the members of that committee?
You have to have, there's 2 ways to do that. You can have the selectmen and the school committee each town vote to request the moderator to appoint a planning committee. 3 members. 1 is required to be a school committee member.
3 members only.
3 members only. 1's a school committee member, and 2 can be whoever he or she wants to appoint, and the citizens of that community. So in effect, you've got 8 towns, correct, dealing here? So you'd have 24 people sitting.
So it's 3 from each town?
Correct.
Okay.
So they're all sitting as equals, 3 from each town sitting at the table.
1 from the school committee and 2 others?
Correct, from each town.
Okay.
So that's all 8 school committee members in this case, plus, right? 3 plus 3 times 24?
It would be 1 school committee member
And
from
two-
each
and
town.
2 other.
Sheffield has 4 representatives.
No, I get that.
Okay.
I
So
said
it would
8
be-
school committee members
Right.
total,
Yes.
plus
16
16 town
others.
members, 2
Right.
from each town.
Yes.
Okay, and you said 1 person decides who those people are?
The law says the moderator appoints
Of the towns.
of the towns.
The moderator of each town, terrific. Okay, and then when they join and form a planning board, what's the process for that? So now you got 24 people making a planning board. How does that work?
Now you're into phase 2, we're going to phase 2.
Okay.
What happens is, somebody has this case, let's just say Peter would call a meeting and post it, because you're now subject to the open meeting law, and would post it, and then when you get together, then you would elect a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary to do that. And then you have to decide how the posting is going to be done. You could have one of the regions post it up, and then a same posting is sent to each town, in the town. It's just 48 hours, we'd say a week ahead, so each town you have it, but as long as the region's posted, one of the regions both are posted. Then you have to come up with the voting, how you're gonna vote. Each person can have a vote, there can be 24 votes, if there's only gonna be 8 votes, how are you gonna work that? There's nothing in the law says how that has to work. And then you also say, what's a quorum? What's gonna maintain a quorum? Is it that at least 1 member from each town? So you got 8 towns, you gotta have at least 5 represented. Do you have to have all 3 or just 1 or 2? You gotta set the rules up for that. There's nothing in the law that says however you do that. So each one you have to set your own set of rules. That makes sense.
Okay. So actually, we're not changing the composition of this group now, we're just formalizing it. Right? It's the same 24 people?
Yeah, what do you
Okay.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
when you, so you go from a committee to a planning board, it's the same 24 people, but you have some
No, you
extra.
have three from each one that come together as a planning board. You go from 3 for each town, times 8 is, there's 24 people sitting there.
Right.
So if you put them around, you could have town A, B all the way around with 3 people.
Right,
Have you
no, I got
ever-
that, I'm just saying that committee doesn't change composition.
It could, right?
What?
Like, so this is an informal committee,
Correct.
right? So if you were to choose option 3, then it would all of a sudden become,
And this is what the law allows you
Same
to
number
do.
of seats.
It's the
Yeah.
same members.
And-
right, but it might be different people.
Yeah.
Oh, of course,
Right.
Yeah.
but it's the same shares, so to
Same
speak.
seats.
I think
Perfect.
I think what you've done is, I would call an exploratory committee to lock up, but
Yeah.
if you're gonna get down to do it, then you really wanna go this way, because then someone says, well, who said you guys could sit here? Well, I follow what the law says, now I represent my town, one of 3 people in my town at the planning board, so it's a legal process that you're representing. And then they can then send out, come up with an agreement, send it out, go through the process.
Right, I just wanted to make sure that option 3 was put in place by the towns.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that I understand that process is the Board of Selectmen of each town asks the moderator.
There's two ways of doing it. Originally, it said you had to go to town meeting, and the town meeting had to have a warrant on a town meeting article, say authorize the planning board, the planning committee to be formed and appointed by the moderator. We in March said, okay, what happens in the middle of the year, they wanna try to do something, it gets cumbersome, so we went and had the law amended saying you had to get your school committee from that town and the, selectmen from that town. So in your particular case, for Berkshire Hills, you've got that school committee could vote and say, okay, we agree that we wanna, was it 4 towns? You had 3 towns, 3 towns?
3 towns.
3 towns, that we would like to have a planning board, a planning committee formed from each of the towns. And then the moderator from that town will appoint at least one person, one school committee member of that town. So you have 3 of that from that side and then 2 others from each town.
So the school committee makes the decision to move forward with that option.
And the selectmen from each town.
Okay, so the school committee and the selectmen together.
It's the school committee
Have-
member, it's a
No,
member.
no, the school, because you are, your town is your school committee is your regional school committee. So they would vote to say, we want, and it's a good idea too, because now everybody's on the same page. That we agree, we request that our member towns, the selectmen from member towns, also vote to appoint a planning committee, 3 from each town by the moderator. It's not a little confusing, but.
Well, it's actually simpler than 8 towns calling a special town meeting
Yes.
to try to explain the murky waters of what we don't even yet know how to explain to anybody. So, at least the members of the school committee and the boards of selectmen have some general thought process,
And they don't-
conception,
and they-
thank you.
By the way, they don't have to be in a joint committee. The selectmen could, when town A, Great Barrington could vote, yes, we want our moderator to do it. The school committee in the meeting says, well, we want to vote it, so then they could appoint, the moderator could appoint. Try to make it as simple as possible without tying you up with everything.
In Sheffield, Southern Berkshire Regional School District, there's 3 towns that only have 1 school committee member. Suppose that 1 school committee member from one of them 3 towns says, I don't wanna do it. He or she does not wanna do it. Where do we go from there?
That's a good question, because the law is silent on that, doesn't say anything. Now, I don't know if Glenn would want to chime in with that one or not.
Well, we're gonna need an answer because this is reality here.
Yeah.
I just want to ask one follow-up question.
I'm just saying, I don't know the answer. You probably would want to talk to your town council.
Well,
and-
you guys are the ones that write the law here. so-
No, we didn't write the law.
There's no
That
law.
piece was always in, it. We didn't change that. We just added that the school committee and the selectmen could appoint, as opposed to waiting for town meetings. The law is silent. It says you appoint. By his assumption, I'll stick my neck out. If you can't get somebody, the school committee won't, then you let the moderator appoint somebody else. That's interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just
one-
guessing, don't.
That's a good thing, that's fine.
But that's just me speaking, and I don't have any, I'm just saying.
Bullshit.
3
Be careful what you say to Charlie.
I want to know what Glenn has to say. This will be, I want Glenn's comments.
I have a follow-up question. It goes back to the word you used, cumbersome, and I think it's a little bit the elephant in the room here. Have you ever worked on a successful merger where you had a 24-person committee Regional District Planning Committee, 24-person.
No, but we've had up to 15 or 16. The other piece of work we do is regional agreements, updating regional agreements. Some of them are like 20, 30 years old, and we update with that. Sometimes we've had 15, 16 people on that committee.
Our regional agreement in more than 20.
Yeah, we had a.
Yeah. So,
But it
in
was
fact,
successful.
Mac Reed, one of our other consultants, was working with you on that.
Is there a possibility that we could get special legislation passed that gave us some relief on that 24-person member?
If you want, but trying to get legislation passed takes years.
That might take us 12 years
Yeah.
instead of 2 or 3.
No,
We're still
I don't
trying to
agree
get
with
some
that.
stuff, we're still trying to get some stuff through the legislature, and every year it gets stuck in, third reading, and we don't get it out of third reading, so I mean, again,
This is something you could, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
put on your lapel as a success. Ram right through.
I'm
not sure at our age we need anything.
I think what you would do is they get appointed, and then you establish what's a quorum and who's going to vote, and then frankly, not everybody can attend every meeting, but at least they get informed of what's going on. I've worked with I was up in Vermont in a supervisory union, and they had 24 school committee members I was dealing with, so it can work. So, oh yeah, but the fact is, every town is represented, and what's part of that planning committee that forms the board, each town needs to go back to their town and keep their selectmen, FinCom, and public, and keep them informed of what's going on and get input. When I worked on Somerset Berkeley doing theirs, that was just a secondary region, 912, but we went out the first time out, we went out like 8 meetings, and we got about 5 or 6 things that we needed to get feedback. We went back, changed it, went out again, and got it, and then we got to town meeting, everything passed. So, again, it's a process that you gotta go through, and everybody knows. What's gonna work, and one of the big things is, what are you gonna be able to do is provide the best possible education that you can for your children, so that they start life and they can go on and become productive citizens and earn a living, as well as the resources from your towns, what can you afford, what can you put in, and how the best way to use those resources. And all 3 of us have been in regional school districts, so we know what it's like.
A word about the planning boards too. I mean, with a group that big, you may want to establish subcommittees so that certain people work on certain things. And the other thing I would add, because it always comes up, is I don't know if the 2 districts use the same legal counsel, but you're gonna need access to an attorney when you get into this. There's gonna be a number of issues where you're gonna want your legal answer for how to proceed.
So in this case, though, do you want your town attorney, or do you want an expert?
It's up to the group.
I wasn't saying that our town attorneys aren't experts, so she did pick up on that. I mean, an expert in this field.
There are some law firms in the state, and I can tell you that,
We have
that
some,
have dealt, you know, specifically with regional school districts, and they know the regional school districts agreements up and down, so, but to answer your question, if I had a town attorney who had not dealt with that, I would probably think, I would think we need to go someplace else.
We
not
need
to
special
offend that
counsel
person.
for this.
Also, we don't really want 8 town attorneys on this,
No,
right?
right.
We want a committee that gets one attorney.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The only problem you can wind up, and I've seen this happen, when you go to town meeting, someone will say, okay, we wanna vote, we want town to accept this agreement, an amendment or a regional agreement, and first what does our town attorney think? And the person stands up and says, I don't know, I didn't review it, so where do you think that's gonna go?
Yeah.
So we gotta be sensitive to that.
Sure.
Or, we worked with another district grade I did, and the district council worked with the town attorneys to make sure everything was okay. So when we got to town meeting, by the way, it went through no problem. But again, you got involved in, you get stages of, you gotta have your town attorneys, you gotta have the Department of Education legal, and then the department itself going through to make sure before it gets approved. Any amendment or forming a new regional agreement has to be approved by the department and signed off by the commissioner.
So when you write your grant, you could write your grant for facilitator costs, for consultant costs, and for legal costs. All that is how it's all written, but those are all probably acceptable reasons to be granted.
We facilitate the process, and we do, right up, we do the agendas, we run the meetings. The only thing we do is send the agenda, to one of the regions to post it, and then send it out to everybody else. We meet, open meeting law, after someone take the minutes, they have to be approved, all of that process.
Great. That's actually a good lead into Bonnie's
Yeah,
question,
well, yes,
because those are the services they would provide.
correct, correct. And so I think now we could ask Glenn to come to the table and share any place you can squeeze in, Glenn. There's a spot at the head of the table next to Jane, or pull a chair around and sit in front of us all, whatever makes you comfortable.
So, what do you want to talk about? Can I make one thing clear? I don't work for them. No, I'm serious. The impression might have been that I was here as their
No, I get it.
association arm candy lasers.
Team uniform. We noticed he was wearing the blue tie, and you're all wearing burgundy face ties.
Well, I do want to say that we work with
Yeah.
we're a separate organization, but we work
Yeah.
together for the benefit of education.
And I should also make it clear that we are not here to sell you any services. The kind of services that you're looking at for professional regionalization facilitation, it's something that we've worked with districts on, and we've spent a lot of time doing that, and we're very much involved with the Berkshire County initiatives, but we don't do it for a fee. We do it as a member service to our members, and not at the scale that you're looking at here. So it may well be, if you're looking for a consultant, you're certainly not going to be looking at us. But there are resources that we can provide, and one of them is this thing, which will give you in detail some information about some of the issues that you need to brainstorm about as you think about doing this. Regionalization requires Camp David style negotiations, exceptional interpersonal collaboration, the ability to deal with multiple outlier personalities wherever they happen to be. It's an extremely process-heavy enterprise. I'm now on my 4th round of Berkshire County regionalization cycles. Every 7 years, so this is the start of round 4. I don't know, you didn't throw up the option of the superintendency union, which is another option that many districts consider, where you share a superintendent, and you can do that without much formality, but the only thing that does is to divide your superintendent in half.
Berkshire Hills does that currently with
You have some extra copies out there?
Yeah, there's,
there may be, by the way, in this legislation was moving pretty quickly through the legislature until the governor decided he would put a full court press to dismantle it in favor of his own proposal, which very few of our members are interested in. The bill that went to the Senate before it was amended and will now go to the House has money in it as an incentive for districts that may want to talk about different regional structures to use for resources, consultancies or other kinds of things. So there may be money out there, and you might want to study that. I would just warn you that be careful about taking money from people who have a very deliberate agenda and who may not take no for an answer. So the pro quo may not be worth the quid if the conditions involve having the tentacles of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education involved in your business. Their agenda is to consolidate as much as possible to minimize the number of school districts, and to do it for reasons that probably are easier for them to oversee, not necessarily those which would please the public that you may have. And our particular association agenda is that we are in favor of whatever the districts decide they want for themselves without the interference of a state agency that does not have a good record of collaboration. But they do have money that's probably going to be available one way or the other. So Effective communications is very important. It's like reorganizing, you know, when schools go to a block scheduling mode, or when they go to the small schools concept, or when you go to a change in start time. Communicating effectively is very important. Everybody has to have a hand in it. Many issues have to be discussed, and a lot of them are listed here. Some of them you might not have expected. Some of them could be very petty. Some of them could be very significant. You've got a lot of collective bargaining agreements, provisions to reconcile. And no one wants to take the lower number if they're working in your district. So there's that. You want an academic impact study to determine whether a regionalization will provide more services more conveniently. Who will be convenienced, who will be inconvenienced, because the people that are inconvenienced will quickly step up. You want to look at the specific issues of the regional agreement that Steve talked a little bit about. In some districts, you require unanimous consent or a supermajority to close a school. In Central Berkshire, you needed the consent of every member community until they were able to revise their charter so that you only needed 8 out of 9 to close a school. There may be issues around supermajorities for taking certain actions. In Dayton Rehoboth, it takes 70% majority to elect a superintendent. In other districts, if you don't have every community represented at the meeting, there's no quorum. So in Silver Lake, which is Kingston, Plimpton, and Halifax, if Halifax feels they're being disadvantaged by the other two towns, they just leave the meeting and there's no quorum. That was a provision that they installed to protect the rights of the smaller districts from the bigger districts. Others have supermajorities in general. Very interesting strategies around how you elect your people. And there are different modes, and by the way, I've reprinted for you the regionalization legislation in the back of that handout so you can take a look at them. How you elect the school committee. Do you elect everybody at large on the presidential election days? Do you have an election in the spring? Is each member elected individually by town in whatever sequence you use? Do you use weighted voting, where we could be sitting at the table and he could have 2.1 votes and I could have 0.3? Because it's weighted voting. You could actually lose it on bodies and win it on the majority. It's an interesting strategy, but those are things that you're going to want to talk about. And the question about keeping schools open, which is probably the most sensitive one. We looked at this when we first assisted Mount Greylock, Williamstown, and Lanesboro in thinking about what they were going to do. Ultimately, they have regionalized as a single district. It took a long work. It took at least 10 years of work to get them to agree, and the departure of a couple of people who were very difficult through the process, and just anything, those people were in the room was going to be difficult just by the nature of who they were, so had to wait for them to leave the committees. But the real savings comes from closing the school. I think you'll find that if you do a financial impact study. You're always going to need the classroom teachers. You will always need to educate your students in elementary schools, which are fairly close by. And no one wants to close a school. So that's a very delicate and sensitive issue. And you know, when social media is as powerful as it is, although you may not have as much of it out here as in other parts of the state, bad rumors can get started, people can be misled. This is a very complicated exercise. So having everyone understand something other than the most reproduced talking point is a very serious consideration. And then there are the political considerations. If I'm a parent and I have a problem, where do I go to get it resolved? How do I deal with that? That was a real challenge for the people who might have thought that Berkshire County might have, and still might, have a district-wide region.
You mean a county?
Hmm?
You mean a
County.
county?
Countywide district.
What did I say?
You said district-wide.
Excuse me, a county-wide region. If you're a parent in Lee and you have a problem, where do you go? If you're a parent in Williamstown, you don't want to go any place but Williamstown to get your problem. You know, and the Amherst Pelham thing, I've lived my entire life in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so I'm not unfamiliar with the issue of the college town and its local politics. And, you know, other than that these people would rather go to a meeting than go to dinner on any given day, it's a real challenge. I don't know that they will ever resolve their situation in a way that's going to satisfy people, because it's just not in their interest to end an argument. But it's that. And then there's always, as I said, the DDS and the DESE issues. And what they would want you to do, because that works better for them rather than what works better for you. So those are things you need to think about. It's why it doesn't happen quickly, and it's why sometimes it's helpful to have a facilitator and someone who can do this stuff for you. But it all will ultimately boil down to what is in the gut of the residents of the community and how they feel about this and how it will affect them financially. Under the new Chapter 70 distribution, for which we do not have numbers yet, but we will shortly, and you'll have an opportunity to see how everybody is affected. So I just leave it at that, and if you had any questions for us, we were involved in and continue to be involved in a lot of what's happening in the other part of the county. We've spent some time talking to the people on Cape Cod who are watching very closely what happens out here. They have the same issues. They have a great tourist season, but when the tourist season is over, there's very little going on the Cape. Declining enrollment, minimal economic opportunity other than during the summer, and some of their districts might view themselves as being very inefficient. But I can tell you, little Provincetown on the end is going to be the last district to hold up. They want their independence. They are special, they are unique, they have their own superintendent, and they're never going to do it. And you probably have some communities that may be similar to that. We've also, Franklin County is also watching very closely because they're looking for someone to work out a model that will be successful and beneficial. And I just leave you with, there was a piece, an op-ed that I have somewhere in the office where someone talked about consolidation of districts has not historically been an automatic guarantee of improvements in student outcomes. It has to be done with the right planning, the right transportation, the right facility structure, the right leadership, and then you get your impact for student achievement. But economically, you still have to bring kids to wherever they have to go, and the state has not kept its promise on reimbursing you for that transportation. You still have the growing need for technology. You have your collective bargaining agreements, and you have some of the most engaged unions in the state who are out here. And if, you know, one of the things that's held up the change in Chapter 70 is that there are some members of the legislature who are afraid that the unions would just demand it all for salaries. And the state, I think, loves the idea of consolidation because the fewer management bargaining entities that you have, the easier it is to impose what management's priorities are. So, but your concerns are unique. The district is very different from other situations. You have some wide areas of geography. You have some significant weather issues and economic issues that make these issues urgent. So only you can decide what's best for you, and when you complete your work, you should do what you feel is best for the people in the district. We would not pretend to tell you what that is.
So let me ask some specific questions. If you facilitated this study, would the structure be basically the same? In other words, we would do the same thing?
It was an unofficial gathering of delegates from Amherst, Mount Greylock, New Ashford was there, Hancock was actually there. They were they sent their kids to I believe Mount Greylock. Lanesboro was there. And they sat around a table for a year and a half looking at how they might benefit from a consolidation. And we did all that work. It's arithmetic. It's not particularly complicated. The school leaders and personnel were watching, and they did the academic assessment. But what they ultimately determined was the consolidation of administrative positions was something of a factor. But they point to a lot of people point to other states that have only county-wide school districts. But they don't tell you, conveniently don't tell you, that in Virginia or Maryland, where they have county-wide school districts, within the county, they have sub-county divisions that are independently sort of operated. So they have as a county board. But they don't have any fewer superintendents. They don't have any fewer schools for principals. They just have a consolidated school board. Now, for the state, that's a good agenda. For reasons, for purely political reasons, if you wanted to get into the political science of this thing, we know what it is, and it's minimizing the amount of voices locally that might speak up in an attempt to influence the agenda that the state has. But you wouldn't have fewer people. You wouldn't be consolidating many classrooms, but you would be achieving some economic efficiencies. And in some of those cases, you would be getting some regional transportation assistance that you didn't get before.
So again, from a practical standpoint though, if we either go with a planning committee, a formal planning committee, or we don't, right? We remain informal, as you said?
Well, you can do anything informal that you like.
Right, but I mean, in terms of facilitating.
Yeah, it never came up as an issue because the real issue was what will the communities buy into? And what they buy into is not a function of how big the committee is that plans it.
Right, I understand that, and although I've been told we're not interviewing anyone tonight, I think everyone should be very clear on what these two options are. They sound significantly different to me, unless I'm mistaken. Not better or worse, but different.
And I would also say to you, and I say this to school committee members when we train them, if somebody says to you, this is what you have to do because, or after all this process, we've come this way, so you better support this or else, ask more questions if you're not happy.
We don't have any problem with that. We've shut down the district once, and we were a real problem until we got who we wanted, so we didn't have a problem with that. Although I agree with you.
And I have no opinion about what's best for you.
Yeah.
I really don't. I haven't thought about this. We as part of the Berkshire County Working Group, we've looked at a lot of this stuff just to see what it is. I don't know what's in the hearts and minds of the people of the South County districts. Only you would know that, and that would be for you to discern.
One of the things I'd point out, I told you about, with the Department of Education, is a process of regionalization. And you go up there, this is what we call a pathway to regionalization, and the preliminary discussions and a lot of that stuff, what Glenn just said, you'd have to go into. One of the things you were concerned about, the large number, where you would divide into subgroups, which you talked about, that would be working with that, and then you'd have working with the consultants, and then the committee planning board. So we have a step-by-step process that we would do that you can follow, And then we also came up with the step 2, beginning of the regional, how you would then, when you form it, what do you have to do to, the process of now having the regional, all the checkoff list that you have to do. So that's up on the website if you want to take a look at it, and to take a look at it and come up with different aspects. And again, Glenn's got a very good process here that we talked about, which we would do, your analysis, that your different factors that you want to take a look at, legal, regulatory, political, so forth, that you look at. So again, there's a process there. This is a good document to work from, that you have a good lot of resources to how to start, what do you want to do.
Can that web URL be distributed at some point to us?
Presentation.
Well, that's,
No, this,
That one?
just the URL so that we can download that.
yeah, that's on the DESC website. I'll get that to
Great.
you can pop it up and you send it out to you.
Perfect.
Now, all the stuff is up there that we put together.
Perfect.
Jane?
Do I understand you correctly when, you said that for the nuts and bolts kind of consulting work, that we might be hiring someone else, and that the MASC, sort of stewards you through a process? Can you be more clear about what services you offer?
As I said, you will probably be well served by bringing someone in who can look at some of the things. We did this for 3 counties in the north. In fact, it was like 2007, 2008. That was a much simpler process. For the Berkshire County Education Task Force, we assist in facilitating them and have provided some stuff for them, mostly in an effort to try to expedite some decision-making, not necessarily in any one way or another. If you had the capacity among yourselves, you could do this, but you need some expertise in teaching and learning, the best school structures, what kids need from a school district in order to be successful beyond just the math. The math you could figure out. So there may be some stuff that we could assist you with, but not in significant enough a way for you to complete a project.
See, one of the things we work with is going to different parts of it that you can see up here, putting together a subcommittee, coming up with those, and then into other areas. We bring in people that we might need as subcontractors if we were hired as the individuals to do it, which means we need to maybe talk with MAC or certain things that we might want to do. But I have people that we work with us that are right now sped directors, technology people. We bring them in, academic people that will work for us in all the aspects of it. You take a look at is school buildings, what the shape of your buildings are, and then what combinations you might want to make a change. And again, that becomes, people get very concerned when you start wanting different combinations, just like we have to explain why would be the best for the kids and best for the district. But again, a total explanation.
In comparison with Glenn's discussion about the culture of each town and the difficulty in having some of these discussions and negotiating through rough patches, it seems to me it takes different kinds of people to crunch numbers than it does to help people talk together. So that's what I'm trying to address here.
You need to have a lot of those community meetings. We did it with Lee and Lennox several years ago. Having those kinds of discussions.
So that would be a service that you could offer, possibly.
As a member service, we
Yes.
possibly could, yes. But that would be to gather sort of data from you and you could also put some survey data up to try to and say that you get 20 times more people responding to a survey than you do showing up. We're having, around the state, we are having a hard time getting people to come out at night to go to meetings. For a number of reasons, but pretty much at this time of our lives, pretty much everybody is busy all day long. This isn't like 50 years ago where mom would be home keeping house and dad would be working. Now everybody's working and everybody's got a good job, and people don't wanna spend time going out at night. On the other hand, the faculty are more than happy to meet with you if they can meet during the school day. And they'll give you some good feedback, but they won't respond like parents would. As parents.
We have someone that we work with that does a lot of financial modeling to see the different combinations that we do. So what we bring people in as we need them, depending what your requirements are.
And, you know, we, over the years, we have had a very close association with.
Yeah,
those.
that's not a
No,
competition.
no, we're not, because we're not competing for the same line of
No,
work.
no,
These are highly respected, very competent people. I would warn you, however, that there are lots of people out there who would like to take your money and would like to take somebody else's regional study and do a search and replace. Well, that's what happens with strategic plans.
We're selling it.
If you look at them, they just white out Watertown, New York, and they put in Watertown, Massachusetts, and they sell it to you for $50,000. Marlboro paid $75,000 for a strategic plan that they never implemented because the new superintendent said, this is not appropriate. And with a lot of the consulting stuff, there are people who will write you expensive, detailed, beautiful, glossy reports that will use a lot of words to get where they want to go. And the only people who will make out are the consultants. So I'd be happy to tell you who they are if you want me to. You want to run your potential responders by so that you know who they are. It's not these guys, but there are people out there who would love to link in with the state and with the department and get contracts to do this kind of stuff. And as I say, there are people in Franklin County and people on the Cape who might be a little anxious that the state would say, great, that's a wonderful plan, look at what they did out there, look at what the consultant report said, you guys do the same thing, or we're gonna cut your budgets, or we're going to give you a bad district review, or we're gonna do something to pressure you into doing what we want and what's best for us as opposed to what's best for you.
Any other questions for anyone?
Very helpful, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, all of you.
That was great.
For giving us your time.
I'm one of those people who can go out and work very well.
The Yankee game is still on.
Yes, warm up and after.
Yes. I'm sorry, the Astros game.